So
wow,
judge.
what a kavod to begin this class. Okay, if I had done it at the end of last class, I would have had the excuse that I need to rush, so I can't go through all the sources. But I put together a bit. It's a very small seif Daled of Siman Samech Daled. I have sources here, and I'll share the screen. Look, here it is. Okay, who wants to read? Who wants to read this poem? Raphael.
אם החתן אינו רוצה לעשות סעודה, וקרובי הכלה, just a second, my zoom stopped. אוקיי, וקרובי הכלה רוצים לעשות סעודה, כופים אותו שיעשה סעודה לפי כבודו ולפי כבודה.
Okay, so we have a battle of wills here. Okay, for this marriage, he doesn't want to make a big feast, and it's not her, but the family of the kala want to make a big deal of the wedding. Kofin oto shi'aseh seuda. He doesn't have the choice here. And what kind of seuda? So we have here a principle, lefi kvodo v'lefi kvoda. Yeah, according to the status or the level of him and of her, or of his family and of her family. And that leads us into a few areas. So I wanted to move backwards and then sideways. Okay, let's go kind of to the source of this idea, and then see where it plays out a bit in halacha. And I have to say, I thought this was a bit dry, but then actually this got me to think a lot about my own marriage. Maybe I'll explain a bit in a bit. Okay, so I say every time I present, the Rabbi Nachman gave the advice that whenever you read Shulchan Aruch, your eyes should flick to Ber Gola, okay, to see the source of the halacha. So here we have Ber Gola brings two sources for this halacha. Tur b'shem Harabi Ephraim, v'kach katav Harav Magid, sham b'shem, so sham in the Rambam cited above, b'shem Harav Ibn Migash, v'sheken eid b'shem Arif, v'shekach katav Rashba, v'Aramban, Dekai Malan, Ola imo ve'ena yoredet imo. Okay, so we have Rabbeinu Ephraim and Ibn Migash, or the Rif is kind of the two sources, and the Ber Gola already gives us the hint of what's the principle at play. Ola imo ve'ena yoredet imo. She rises in status and does not, but does not go down. Okay, so we have here, it's basically the same formulation in the two sources. Maybe I'll pick on people, is that okay? Masha, can you read the tool?
כתב הרב אפרים, is that where we are?
Yeah.
היא אמר חתנה לא תלחנה, אלא כניסנה בלא סעודתה, וקרבי הכלה באו דלעביד סעודתה, קייפינן לי דלעביד סעודתה, כפום מנהגה דחזי לדידי ולדידי. וקיימלן אולי מו, ואינה יורדת עמו.
Okay. You want to try a rough translation? On the spot.
For the chatuna, if he hasn't prepared it, so Chana, if he hasn't worked, but he wants to marry her without a seuda. It's just what you've just said, right? And her relatives, the relative of the kala, go to prepare a seuda. They obligate him to make the Suda. And I don't know, Kipuma Minhaga, according to the Minhag there, Chazi Ledide Veledide, that both of them are required to do it.
Yeah, or Chaze, it's Ra'ui. According to the Minhag, and it has to be fitting both for her and for him.
Okay.
Or for him and for her.
So as we are learning that she should be raised up with him and be brought down by him with him.
Right. Okay, so that's kind of the source. We won't read it again, but it's interesting. The Magid Mishneh brings almost the same language in the name of the Ibn Migash. And in the version of the Rosh, he also brings the same text, and he finishes וכתב דמעשים באו לפני רב אלפס רבו והיה דן כן. So it's not just a theoretical ruling, but Rabbeinu Ephraim says that the Rif actually put this into practice. Any questions?
Yeah, Josh.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll cover this, but it's interesting with like who the players are here, right? Because the Chatan is almost acting as if he's talking for himself and the bride, right? La tarechna kanisna, right? That we will not, be troubled to make a suda, and we will just, do nisuin. And it's her relatives that are the respondents. And so the question is, where is she in all this? Like, I mean, it's not surprising that in some places we've seen, like in Kiddushin also, where her voice isn't there, but like, is she with her future husband to be, or do we care, or is this just like a common, we're just talking Lashon Hoveh, where it's often the relatives who are like, this is going to ruin us in terms of our station in life if they don't make a good Suda.
Right. So that's it. Like, it's probably something we have to keep in mind as we read the text, is where she disappeared to, right? Because we had in the earlier Seifim, and there's something about she can be mochelet and so on. Like, she did have a voice, and suddenly she disappears, and the players are him and Krovei Hakala. And even though the principle of Olaimo ve'ena yoredetimo is kind of, it's something that kind of strengthens the bride's position, her voice isn't heard in this particular instance. Okay, so good to point out. Okay, just the Magid Mishneh also brings lots of sources, and he also brings at the end, V'af Ramban Zal katav shadin din emet. Wow, this is the real halacha. Let's see if there's any commentaries which are interesting for us. Beritev brings an interesting one. Alan, that question or volunteering?
Yeah, happy to read.
Okay, go for it. Beritev.
כבודה, מי הכל לפי תור העניין, שאם הם יפרזו יותר מדי, ודאי אין לקוף. ואמן דנשא בתולה, וקרובי הכלה רוצים להוליך הכלה מבית אביה לבית בעלה בתוף ובכינור, כמשפט הבנות הבתולות. והבעל מוחה, שאינה רוצה להרבה בשמחה, מפני שהוא אמן. אין הבעל יוכל לעכב. דעולה עמה ואינה יורדת עין כנסת הגדול. Right.
So you have two different halachot, right?
Right. Okay, so it really all goes according to the particular case. If they're totally, if the relatives are going totally over the top, definitely they can't force the chatan to do that. And second case, okay, a widower marries a virgin, and the relatives want to have this musical accompaniment. The husband protests. He doesn't want to have extra simcha because he's a widower. The husband cannot actually prevent that because of the underlying principle we have already discussed.
Right. Okay, so here the status, the ola and yoredet, is about what's fit for, I don't know, previous marital status, right? That's what we're looking at here, right? If she's a betula, then she's treated as a betula, and the fact that he's of a lower level of simcha, whatever you want to call it, doesn't prevent her from having the kind of kavod that's fit for betula. Okay, so that's at least one way of understanding this idea of ola and yoredet. Okay. Okay.
The first line is also interesting because it talks about not spending too much money at a wedding.
Yeah.
And I once read a certain Rav, I don't remember who, it might have been Rav Aviner, writing against people spending beyond their means for weddings.
Yeah.
And here you see an idea of that again.
Yeah. That's very good. It's probably very difficult to codify exactly how much. But yeah, there's a limitation, even though we said everything's according to her kavod and so on. There's limitations.
I think that's why he says "Hakol lefi Torah ha'inyan," right? Right? Is that we can't really, you can't just give a general rule for this, like X number of dollars and so forth. But it sounds like Yefazru termidai, right? Or there's going to scatter too many coins. It's like if it's going to ruin them financially to go into the wedding, the marriage this way, which also I think puts the bride back into this. It sounds like it's actually a case of the chatan and kala against her family potentially.
Yeah, I found Rav Aviner saying. Rav Aviner says, "Ana lola argen chatuna yikara, ein shum to'elet, ha'ikar hu chuppah v'kiddushin. Adif l'tetet kol ha'kesef l're'evim. Better to give the money to poor people. They yosif bracha rabbah l'chatan v'kala. It will give a big bracha to the chatan and kala if they do that."
That actually makes a lot of sense, because my first thought when you said that before you found the quote was that I don't know if it's as much an issue of them spending beyond their means and putting themselves into dire straits once they're married, but I think it's more trying to remind both the chatan kala what the real focus is. Is the real focus the wedding, or is the real focus the marriage? And when you go spending bizarre amounts, you're putting and we see this all the time, especially like in America. I know people the focus is the wedding, the dream wedding, and they kind of forget that that's secondary.
What are these laws called that limit? There's a term for it in English that limit the amount. All communities did attempt. I say all communities, many communities, especially in the Middle Ages, but not just the Middle Ages. Very recently, in Hasidic communities in America, in New Square, other places. There was takanas made of how much you could spend. But there's a term to this. What's it called?
Sarah put an answer in the chat. Did she just disappear? She said sumptuary laws.
Yeah, sumptuary laws, right? Sumptuary laws, which itself seems, what a great term, sumptuary laws. So, but they're very, very hard to put. So my question is, what's our stake in the whole thing on both sides? That we force the kafinan is we force, right? That we force the chassan to. By the way, here's the chassan doing it, right? As seems to be assumed by the Bali, he's making the chuppah. But how, could someone just articulate for me what's our stake in all this? Why do we have these laws, so to speak?
It's coming out of her future financial stability.
Well, that's no, but also what's our stake that there should be a nice chuppah? In other words, it goes both. What's
l'sameach chatan v'kala.
feels
Kavod. It's
Honor.
kavod.
Kavod.
It's,
So
it's not
kavod.
treating some, it's kavod. That's the way it's referred to in the halacha. Kavoda.
Right, but
It's
but it's
not,
not really
it's treating, and if you think about that tshuva that we just read, about the almon, it's not giving the proper respect and importance and significance to the event that's before us.
So therefore, there's a community need. In other words, we have a community need that a chuppah should not be, on one hand, on one hand, the chuppah should not be trivial. By
Exactly.
chuppah, I mean the whole thing. Therefore, you spend money on the dinner, you spend money on the bride looks fine, you dower the bride, whatever that is. We have a community need. So what is that community need? And I sound.
No, I think it's a personal need. I'm not sure if it's a community need. I think it's a personal need. It's a personal need to feel like you are a respected member of the community. That you had a proper wedding. You deserve just as much as everyone else.
I agree with you that that's there. I think there's also
a problem though with that.
We want weddings to be an important event. We want weddings to be an important event. Why is it, by the way, that this is a continuous problem, even as it's easier to get food, it's easier to do this, it's in different centuries, but the weddings always cost more than someone could afford. Like, why is that?
But Rav Daniel, but when we read the sources themselves, it's clear that we don't have a need that the wedding be mechubad. If both sides are okay with having a very, very simple, even a too simple wedding, it's okay. The question is if I or any of the sides can actually go and step on like the ma'amad, the kavod, that's something very real on the other side. We see also in Chod Nezikin that kavod is something very tangible. Taking someone's cloth, if he's the head covering, if he's a king or a normal or someone lower in society, it's not the same thing. So like that's what they're speaking about. Like the Chatan wants to diminish the kavod of the kala, this very tangible status and society.
Okay. I think I just think all these factors are there. I mean, if you lower the kavod of the kala, then you lower the kavod of a wedding. And if you lower the kavod of a wedding, it's not good for the society that we want to create. Yeah. Seems to me that's. I have nothing more. There
are a few hands. Let's do some short comments of Asher and Alan.
Okay, I just because the halakha itself is saying. Because the kavodo v'kvoda. The problem I'm having here is that if we're forcing him to do something that he feels would not, that he's not comfortable with for whatever his reason is, then we're not really doing it v'kvodo.
Right. It's not lirtzona.
Well, again, one of the problems is we don't know what she thinks. We know what her family thinks. But we do know what he thinks within this setting. And we're forcing him to do something that he doesn't want to do. And we're saying it's because of his honor. That seems very either counterintuitive or contradictory. I'm not sure which, or both.
Okay. So
Asher, you better start saving up. That's all right.
Believe me, I know.
However you argue about it now, I just tell you.
At this point, from what we've read, the kavod is defined in terms of societal norms, right? It's what's done for betula, so you have these drums and musical instruments, and what's done for an alamon is a different thing. What's done that's how you define it. It's not even what they want. It's what's fitting to them in terms of society. Alan.
Yes, just to tack on to Rav Landis and Asher, right? That I think this the idea of kfiyah is important here, right? It's insisting that the ultimate center of gravity of this event is not only the like very close inner circle of the Chatan and Kala. It's the community themselves. That right. It goes back to the question of who is chuppah really for, and like we saw in last week, the community can force the Chatan to not work, whether he wants to or not, because they are the ones with coercive power. That feels strikingly different than, at least in the United States, how we generally talk about marriage.
Okay, let's go back into the text. The Pitchei Tshuva has brings another angle to this. Maybe Joel, before you go.
All right. Ukrovei hakala rotzim. כתב בספר המקנה, לכאורה משמע, ואם אין קרובי הקלה מקפידים, מהני מחילה, כמו שכתבו לאל, probably, is it Sif Bet? Yeah, Sif Bet, I think. Okay, so just I'll stop there for a moment, right? It seems to be, l'chora, that if the family doesn't say anything, right, if they don't care, then she can waive her the honor of a really big Suda. All right. Ve'av shekatavnu la'el sif aleph delama hani mechila meshum simchat atzmo. Right. So he can't say, I don't really want any of this. Tzarich lomar dehachamar lasot suda la'acharim lefi kvodo kvoda ve'ein ze inyan lemechilat simchatam ad kan dato. Okay. So it's different for the Su'uda than like a person. He can't waive, say, I don't really want to do this many days of Simcha. He can't do this, but the Su'uda is not about him. It's about their honor with everybody else, essentially, with the rest of the community. And therefore, this is not about their Simcha that they're waiving, but rather about the everybody else that they're making the Su'uda for.
Mm-hmm. Right, so there's a nice split here between Simcha and Kavod, almost. Right? The Simcha is their own. It's I don't know if you do Chefza Gabra split, but the Suda that they're doing for other people is a function of Kavod, and therefore they can be Mochel, because they can do that for themselves. But the Simcha for themselves isn't something that they can choose not to have. Right? They have to rejoice in their wedding. So I was looking for a few places where this comes from, this idea of Ola imo ve'ena yoredet imo. And there's one or two or three sources which are quite instructive. One of them is from Masechet Smachot. I don't remember exactly the context that it's being given in, but it's I think who you do a big levaya for. I can't remember exactly the context. I'm sorry. It says hakala yotzet ben bekvod avia ben kevod chamea mipnei, and in some versions it's shemalim bekavod velo moridim, which is a nice Chanukah parallel. And other versions she'ola imo ve'ena yoredet. Right. So I mean, it's like, again, if I'm correct, it's the levaya. The way the kala goes out is a function of either the status of her father or the status of her father-in-law, because the status of her father-in-law affects her status, right? She has the higher of the two statuses. That's the idea of ola imo ve'ena yoredet. If she comes up from a higher status, then you go according to that. And if he comes from a higher status, you go according to that. And that's that's the principle here. Okay, I'm sorry I don't remember exactly the context there. But maybe I'll go to safer ground, which is the Talmud. There's a nice smicha bechina here, right? Amar Rav Huna, B'daklan Rav Huna bar Chinana. Okay, so Rav Huna, when he was studying, his teacher, Rav Huna bar Chinana, tested him with this. Okay, and this is the case. This is the question he's being asked. Hi omert lahanik, v'hu omer shelo lahanik. Shomin la tzara didahu. Okay, so here's an obvious case. If she says she doesn't want to breastfeed, and she says she does want
Other
to
way around,
breastfeed.
other way around.
You're right. She says she does want to breastfeed, and he says no, don't. Okay. She has the veto because not breastfeeding, which here is a sign of status, of higher status, right? If you hire someone else to do it, but there's pain caused in holding back the milk. Okay, so if she wants to breastfeed, then she does, whether or not he wants to or not. Okay, so that's an obvious case. Now here's the question: Hu omer lahanik v'hi omert shelo lahanik, mahu? If he says feed and she says I don't want to feed, who has the veto? Okay, and then we have a little bit more information. Kol hecha delav ocha shomin la. If it was not the practice of her family to breastfeed, then we listen to her. But hi orcha v'hu lav orche mai. If it's the practice of her family to breastfeed and not the practice of the women in his family, who do we listen to? Batar didei azlinan or batar dida azlinan? Do we listen, or do we follow the practice of his family, or do we follow the practice of her family? Okay, did you get that? I summarized it in English because it's a little bit fine. She doesn't want to breastfeed and he wants her to, but women in her family usually breastfeed and in his family they don't. Who wins the argument? Okay, what do you think?
According to what we read before, the most difficult one.
Okay, or what do you mean the most difficult?
The fancier.
The fancier, right? Pashetna le meha. So this is the answer that the students gave to the Rav. Olaimo ve'ena yoredetimo. Okay, if the women in her family usually breastfeed and in his family they don't, which means that his family is from a higher status, then she follows the practice in his family. Okay, olaimo ve'ena yoredetimo.
In other words, breastfeeding was considered like a slovenly kind of thing, a lower class thing.
Right.
And so therefore, if he comes from a family where they don't breastfeed, that means they're upper class, then she can say, well, I married you to, and I'm going to be like your family.
Right. It's interesting because there's two factors here. There's the pain and the status, and they're a bit contradicting. Or there's three actually. There's desire, right? What she actually wants, and the pain and the status.
So far, the pain and the status are not contradicting. So the pain was chad mashmai. If it's painful for her and so she doesn't want to, she doesn't.
No, I
Here we're
think
saying if she doesn't want to, but he wants her, the
pain goes both ways, right? There's the pain of like withholding the milk, and then there's also like breastfeeding is painful and uncomfortable. So it's interesting it's being brought as a factor because it kind of goes on either side.
I have been told that breastfeeding is not uncomfortable unless the baby can't detach. In other words, wants it all day long.
It definitely can be, especially.
Yeah. Every case is different.
Every woman is different. Yes.
Every baby's different. Okay.
Sarah wants to say something.
Sarah. Sarah, I don't hear you. We don't hear you.
We don't hear you.
No.
Sarah, we don't hear you.
Maybe write it and someone will read it out. So I feel it's about to be something important, so I want to hear this one. I was just saying. Okay. So you're giving textual sources to what Lexi was saying. You can go
They each clearly had different experiences breastfeeding.
Yeah.
Okay.
They had different wives.
So just it's interesting. There's two different asmachtas, I guess, brought for this concept. Amar Rav Huna Maikra v'hi beulat baal. The Torah says beulat baal, and if you misread the pshat of beula, then it sounds like be'ola. It's raising up. Okay, ba'aliyato shel baal v'lo b'yiridato. She goes up with the status of the baal, and she doesn't go down with him. Rabbi Elazar amar mehacha, ki hi הייתה אם כל חי, לחיים ניתנה ולא לצער ניתנה. Right, so the original wife was אם כל חי, was the mother of all living, but chai in the sense of like the good life, right? And that's how she's created. So she doesn't depend on the status of her husband. Okay. I just started thinking about when I was looking through all of this. I was thinking of my wife is a descendant of the kings of France, right? And I'm a nothing, so it really got me thinking about what all the expectations in our shared life. Just one more source from Bereshit Rabbah, which is also quite early, depending on how you date it. There's a whole list of opinions on where this name Chava comes from. Actually, really interesting. But one of them is this: Ki hi hayta im kol chai. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar amar im kol chai. Right? She not im kol chai. She's with all of life, and like we said, like real chaim, real life. Tane heshir olaimo heini ena yoredet imo. If he becomes richer, then her status goes up with him, and if he becomes poorer, then her status or her expectations of how to live a life don't go down with his new status. Okay. It doesn't matter. Okay. I think I'll finish. I'll run through just some places where this comes up. The Ola imo ve'ena yoredet imo. Okay. So one of them is in terms of mezonotea, right? How much food a wife can eat, right? And I think in a poor family, that's a big issue. So the Torah says, "Ochelet imo mima shehu ochel, v'shota imo mima shehu shote, ve'im mishpachta o beit avia minhagam begdolot yoter mima shenoheg הבעל, אם כל בני משפחתה, בין אותם שאין עשירים, בין שאינם עשירים, מבקשים אותם הגדולות, אז צריך להנהיגה כדרך שנוהגים בני משפחתה. וקיים עלן עולה עמו ואינה יורדת עמו. Okay, so like, if she's used to fancy food, then that's part of the deal when they get married, is that she continues to eat this fancy food, or fancier than what he's used to. Okay, and right, that's considered just almost a t'nai in getting married. That's what you mean when in the ketubah it says v'ana farnes ve'zon, right? It means according to what you're used to. מתה האישה בחיי הבעל, חייב לקוברה ולטפל בכל צורכי קברתה, right? So the Baal has the obligation to bury his wife. ובכלל זה האבן שנותנים על הקבר, וכן חייב לעשות לה מספד וקינים כדרך כל המדינה. She has the normal burial, which is customary in the land. ואם היה עשיר, הכל לפי כבודו. Okay, so if he's more noble, then it goes according to what's customary for his status. ואם היה כבודה יותר מכבודו, קוברים אותה לפי כבודה, שעולה עמו ואינה יורדת. And again, she's buried according to the status she came into the marriage with, and not according to his status or his means.
Josh, why do you think it seems to me protection for the woman? We're protecting her. Why do you think there is so much concern for protecting the kavod of the woman?
I think so much of her old life is sublimated by her new life, by the husband, and she usually lives with him and does what, and her property is his property, and there's so many things which she loses. Then the halacha kind of has to protect her kavod going into this marriage. I won't say it's protecting her. There's also the issue that maybe her family wouldn't have agreed to the marriage if there weren't these safeguards for her kavod.
In other words, in a society that's controlled by men, a woman, in other words, why isn't his kavod being protected? Why? Because he's in charge of the money. He is that the point? He is in charge. He is sort of, it's a patriarchy. He is so we have to have, I mean, it seems like that. It seems like we're adding protections for her in a patriarchy.
Right. I mean, if we see this as ultimately, as Josh was saying, for the most part, like she moves into her husband's home, she becomes a part of his family. She is like detached from her family for most intents and purposes. And so this is like a small, like, way of minimizing that, right? Like for the most part, she is subsumed into his home and whatever that means, but saying that like, okay, for her, even if she's born into a very privileged family, if she marries someone with much less privilege, she does cede a lot of that privilege. And so seeing this as like, okay, we're protecting some of that, right? We're acknowledging that like she was raised like with certain minhagim, with certain things that she was like yeah, that she was used to receiving, and she's not going to be able to live that same way with her husband. But we're like, trying to protect her kavod to the extent that we can, given that she is mostly ceding it to her husband.
It's interesting. We saw food is she's able to have her normal food, which is pretty big deal. That's every day. Clothing, I didn't see so far.
I'm wondering if in a patriarchal society, we're also trying to defend more the honor of her family than of her. So the whole concern from the beginning was her family wants this. It wasn't saying anything what she does. Maybe it's their kavod that the original halachists were focusing more on.
Aaron, you want to say something?
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
I mean, I think in terms of her family, the reason I think that's actually the only place in which in these particular cases with burial and mizona, you can make some sort of recourse to the Beit Din, but she can't say like her family cannot really get involved here. I think in particular the reason the family gets involved with the wedding is the woman is transitioning from these two different reshiyot, one with her family where they're perhaps an assumption, perhaps incorrectly, right, that the family sort of necessarily has the woman's best interest at heart, right? They will look out for her. To this man who we actually don't know if he necessarily has her best interest at heart. And in particular, if he's trying to sort of skimp on the wedding, we may actually make the assumption that he doesn't have her best interest at heart. Right, because right in this patriarchal society, right, the woman has no recourse except to other male figures through which to mediate her own power. So the family members come in at this intermediate stage as these other men who can force this new man, who we are somewhat suspicious of, to abide by a certain set of strictures.
Go through one or two more, right? I'm sorry if I'm taking so much time.
Actually, maybe just one more because we want to watch other people.
Okay. This one, the Ketubah sons. I don't know if we're going to get to this in our course, but just it says אם יש משפחות שנוהגים לכתוב בכתובתם יותר משיעור חכמים, הם לכתוב. So you can have all sorts of sums in the Ketubah, right? So if the Ketubah is lost, then you have to look, what does her family usually write in the Ketubah? Right? ידקדקו בכתובות קרובותיה, כפי מה שנהגו לכתוב בני המשפחה, כותבים לה. Okay? So that's interesting. So you go according to the Ketubah of her family to see what would have been written in that Ketubah that's lost. And then at the end it says, ואם כתובות נשי משפחתו יתרות מכתובות נשי משפחתה, עולה עמו ואינה יורדת. So you also have to look at the Ketubot in his family and assume that she gets the Ketubah sum, which is the higher of the two. Okay, because as usual, עולה עמו ואינה יורדת.
It also feels like a part of the thing underlying this, and I feel like we mentioned this briefly, is like a desire to somewhat maintain class lines, right? Like to the extent that if you say that the woman coming from a wealthy family, the man marrying her has to be able to write a ketubah like the ketubah of the woman in her family, you're just functionally eliminating like most poor men, right? Who just like, especially if she's like exceptionally wealthy, who will just not be able to provide that kind of ketubah. So in a lot of ways, by saying these are going to be the standards, if you marry a woman from a wealthier family, you're like saying functionally people with like significant class gaps can't get married.
Interesting.
Or they can't get divorced. But
specifically in one direction, like because she can ola, just can't.
It seems also that there's that this whole idea that the ketubas of the family would be the same value. It's and that there are different values in different families was true in the ancient in the medieval times that that there was not less mobility. People, either you were a rich family, you're always a rich family, all the brothers are going to be the same value, same, there's rich families, there's poor families, and there's not much, movement between that. Nowadays, it doesn't seem so relevant. You have one brother who's very rich, another brother who's very poor. There would be, why would the ketubas of the family be the same? All right, let's go to the next Seif. Who is, I don't.
That's me. I'm just pulling up.
Okay.
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. Very interesting. Thank you for all those
Yeah.
sources. Very interesting.
And how do you afford all that pheasant under glass every night?
Yeah, it's very. Oh, I could go into my personal calculations of
Sorry.
expensive cheese.
Sorry.
You can write it. Just don't get divorced. That's the main thing.
All right, we're moving on to Seif Hey. We'll have some of these issues of kavod come in here too. Let's see. Lexi, would you like to read the? So so I'm gonna look at the Shulchan Aruch briefly, which is I think pretty straightforward, and we've seen it. And then there's only a little note of the Rama that I think I want to go deeper into, which will point us elsewhere, and then which will ultimately lead us to a shoot of the Rama. But I'll try to do some of the backgrounds first, but try to get them.
Yavni, can you make your screen bigger?
Can I make my screen bigger?
No, view. Do the view of 150 or more.
Is that better? For me, it now is too narrow. I don't know how. It doesn't all fit. Hang on.
I think it fit.
Do you see the whole line now?
No, you're just a tiny bit missing.
Okay.
Can't stretch your screen?
How about now?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, great. And it's big enough? Great. Lexi, do you want to start by reading Shulchan Aruch?
Sure. אין כונסים בתולה לחופה בשבת, לפיש על ידי החופה זוכה מציאתה ומעשה ידיה, והלאה קונה קניין בשבת. So can't get married to a virgin, as in can't bring her into the chuppah, which is the way of doing nistuin with her on Shabbos, because by doing chuppah with her, you get the rights to the things that she makes and things that she finds, etc. And so it's like you're making a kinyan on Shabbos. אלמנה אין חופה קונה בה, אלא על ידי ייחוד של ביאה, זוכה במציאתה ומעשה ידיה, לפיכך צריך להתייחד עמה קודם שבת, כדי שיהיה קונה קניין בשבת. And with a widow, it's not chuppah that acquires her, but it's a yichud that is leading to or proper for bia is the thing that acquires her. And so you should do yichud with her before Shabbos starts so that you're not acquiring the things she produces and finds.
So this issue, I'm not going to focus on because I think we did this issue when we were talking about what is a chuppah, the difference between the betula and the almanah. But Aaron, do you have a question?
Oh, just one thing that is interesting here, right, is a big discussion in the beginning of Kedushin about whether the kinyan of Erusin is similar or different from other kinyanim. Right, and here it actually seems to sort of be implicitly suggesting it is, because if the kinyan involved in Kedushin were the same as any other kinyan, you wouldn't actually have to say that the problem is that the husband is kona metziyata masayada. You could just say the problem is that he's kona his wife. Which would be,
I actually think that's not necessarily the case. Well, you're assuming that Kiddushin and Nisuin come together, which is not necessarily the assumption in the source that the Shulchan Aruch is drawing.
Yeah, I think we're specifically talking about chuppah,
right,
which is not a kinyan, except as regards the
gaining
of her mitziot and her.
Right, but it is a very relevant, and in this discussion of this issue of Shabbat, the Kiddushin and Nisuin do end up getting conflated and mixed up a lot, and we'll get into that. So you're not alone in making the confusion. Okay, and so then the Rama says,
Can I just ask one question? Can people hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, amazing. Yay. I was confused about she doesn't actually have any Maaseh Yadeha on Shabbos. Because she can't do any, she can't do any productive labor. So then
Find
it's
something.
like a hypothetical. I guess you can find something and
I think
become an
that
owner
No,
of
he
it.
acquires the right to
the
her
right to it. I
findings.
think that's why it's kikone instead of
Yeah.
actually
Well,
koneh.
right. So it's
Right.
just like I guess it's just add another level of abstraction.
No, I think that is a big thing in halakha is that you can acquire rights. That's called a kinyan. That's like that's what we do with or you can even acquire even worse. We talked about before in earlier shares. You can acquire an obligation. When the chatan lifts up the handkerchief, he's acquiring the obligation to do the things in the ketubah.
Yeah,
it's an acquisition of an obligation. That is bizarre.
Yeah.
Here we're talking about acquiring the right to her Maaseh Yadeh.
Yeah, I agree, and I do think that's. But I do think that there's something a little bit more abstract about it. And I think, do you have another explanation for why it's kikone?
No, I think that's basically right. But
yeah, go ahead.
It's a good point. I mean, you're good saying it's not actually koneh, it's just kikone.
Right.
It's a good question.
Okay, so then the Rama points us to, the Rama just says, see in Orach Chaim, where it's discussed in the laws of Shabbat. And as Aaron was already saying, the statement in that Siman is actually about Kiddushin. Should we skip? Yeah, let's skip to Velo Mekadshin. Aaron, do you want to read that? The Rama part.
Right, I assumed it was not just the words Velo Mekadshin.
Yeah.
Yesh matirin lekadesh, hecha de'en lo isha uvanim, Rabbeinu Tam. Ve'efshar dehu adin, hichnisa l'chupa share. V'apagav de'lo kaim alan hache, mikol makom somchin al ze b'shat ha'tachak, gam ki kadol kvod habriot. Moshe regilin sh'lepamim shelo hayu yecholim lahashvot im hanedunya b'yom shishi ad halayla. Dosina chupa v'kiddushin belel Shabbat ho'il ukfar hechinu l'suda l'nisuin. Have biush l'kala l'chatan im lo yichnos ad. Umikol makom l'chatchila yesh lizaher shelo yavo lidei chach. So the Shulchan Aruch is right. We don't have kiddushin on Shabbat. The Rama lists a couple of boundary cases where it would be okay, which you can potentially then apply sort of in any case in which you have no other choice for whatever reason. The Shabbos Chak, you could potentially have Kiddushin on Shabbat, particularly since it may have implications for someone's kavod or busha, but you should ideally not end up in a situation where you might be forced to have Kiddushin on Shabbat. And here I think probably right, talking specifically a Kiddushin Yisuin together, presumably for a marriage.
Right. So for me, this was both surprising because I thought it must be fairly obvious that you don't do weddings on Shabbat. Seems like there would be a lot of reasons. And then it was surprising. And then it was also very intriguing to me because it felt like that moment when you're having a conversation about ideas and philosophical and political things with someone, and then there's a little hook that you're like, oh wait a minute, this person is actually talking about something in their own personal life, not just talking about issues and ideas, and so I wanted to dig into what's behind what the Rama is saying. Yeah, Alan.
Right. Feel free to hold off if we'll get there later. I've seen the Rama's tshuva on this, and it's crazy. It seems crazy, right? We just discussed that if it's a quasi kinyan for a chuppah, it seems like there's a definite kinyan for kiddushin.
Right.
I hope we get into just how we're going to get around that.
Yeah, that's where we're going. That's where we're going. Thanks. Exactly. So, let's look quickly at the Gemara that this is going to be mostly based on. Alan, do you want to take it? It's the Mishnah and the Gemara talking
got
about. Yeah, go ahead.
Where do you want me to start?
From the beginning.
Great. Ko shechayvin alav mishum shvut, mishum reshut, mishum mitzvah, v'shabbat chayaliv alav b'yom tov. Ve'elohen mishum shvut, lo elim be'ilan, v'lo rochbin al gabei behema, v'lo shatin al pnei hamayim, v'lo metapchim, v'lo mesapkin, v'lo merakdin. Ve'elohen mishum reshut, lo danin, v'lo mekadshin, v'lo cholzin, v'lo meyabnim. Ve'elo mishum mitzvah, lo mekadshin, v'lo marichim, v'lo machrimin, v'lo magbihin, magbihin truma, u'maser, kol elu b'yom tov amru, kal v'chomer v'shabbat. Ein ben yom tov l'shabbat, ela ochal nefesh bilvad. Keep going.
Do you want to translate or?
Okay, so there's right. There are issues around work, around what can be done in Yom Tov. Some prohibitions fall under the category of the general shvut rest problem. Some are under like change in domain, right? Or some are reshut, like optional, and some are mitzvot and Shabbat.
Right. I think just to be very clear about the categories, it's a little confusing for me. The word mishum, it seems to be used slightly differently in the three different categories. Right? Mishum, shvut, these are all like forbidden things in some sense because of shvut, but it's still being separated into three categories. The first category seems to be things that you're not allowed to do because they're whatever shvut means. It's not a restful thing. It's not appropriate for Shabbat, which is like slightly less than a doraita category. And then it's mishum reshut sort of means like in spite of being something that is, or at least for example, or the mishum mitzvah, I think is like it's sort of mishum shvut in spite of the fact that it's something that you're required to do by mitzvah. Normally, you're not allowed to do it on Shabbat. And then there's the intermediate category, which is mishum reshut, is something less than a mitzvah, but still something you might think you should do, but you're still forbidden to do it because of shvut. Great. Now, questions about that? You want to take the Gemara? Oh, and in the middle category includes doing kiddushin, as well as other marriage-like things like doing yibum or chalita.
Kiddushin is in two categories, according to what you have.
No, makdishin is.
Oh, makdishin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is like to
makdishin a behema.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's yeah.
Yeah, confusing, but yes.
Okay.
Seems to me that it's not really a kinyan kiddushin. In other words, it's not a form of kiddushin. It's not a form of kinyan. Real. I mean, kiddushin maybe is a form of kinyan, but you don't really acquire a human being. It's not called kinyan. And also,
right. So indeed, in this,
earlier.
And also, chuppah is not even a form of kinyan. Well, it's just that the rabbis gave you her ma'aseh yadeh when you do chuppah, but it's not really a kinyan.
So you could argue that it's still hard to do kiddushin without having a kinyan. That's how we do it. We either makne the shtar or we're makne the shavei pruta. But indeed, that is not, the Mishnah has not mentioned kinyan as the reason. They've said that it's right. They haven't said that in the Gemara. That's not going to be the reason that's brought.
Right. Well, we learned kiddushin in depth, and we said that even however you look at it, only the certainly kinyan shtar and kinyan bia are not kinyan. No, it's not really a kinyan.
She still has to acquire the objects. She's doing kinyan.
But also, even like
how is she doing the kinyan?
She's
acquiring the ring.
Yeah.
That's a different kinyan.
Yeah.
Right.
But we also need to remember that in Chazal's mind, there isn't like a problem on itself to do kinyan in Shabbat. The whole problem of kinyan in Shabbat is gzera shemichtov. So when the Gemara basically says gzera shemichtov, it's because it's kinyan.
Right.
Okay. Like they don't have this conception that like it's an isu mitzadatzmo.
It's not one of the lamitet melachot.
Exactly. For me anyway, my experience of kinyan is like that's a that's like a known thing to be avoided, but it doesn't have that same, thank you, Raphael, exactly. It doesn't have that same weight here to be like the moving reason behind this. All right. Alan, do you want to continue or?
Sure. לא עלים גזירה שמא יתלוש, ולא רכין על גבי בהמה גזירה שמא יצוף לדחום. שמע מינה את תחומין דרייתא, אלא גזירה שמא יחתוך הזמורה. ולא שתין על פני המים, גזירה שמא יעשה חבית של שיטין. ולא מטפחים ולא מספיקין ולא מרקדין, גזירה שמא יתקן כלי שיר. ואלו הן רשות ולא דנין, והמצווה כבד, לא צריכה דקה דעדיף מיני. לא מקדשין, והמצווה כעבד, לא צריכה דאית לאישה ובנים. לא חולצין, ולא מייתמים, והמצווה כבד, לא צריכה דקה גדול ומצווה בגדול ליבם.
Right. So getting back to Raphael's point, the reason behind all these ones that are relevant to us is that it's a gzira lest you right. And do you want to translate the other bolded thing? Sorry, I should have.
Right. You can't betroth, but it's the mitzvah that he's doing. No, it's necessary because he has, I guess he's like taking possession of a wife and children, or no, you need the case for when he has a wife and children. Can you make that a little bit more precise for me?
Yeah. Sure. I think it's unclear, and that like that ambiguity is what's going to be one of the relevant machlokot going forward. Loma kachin. So one way of reading this, which we can see here, if you want to read the Rashi. Wait, which one do I want you to read? V'lo makachin ha-mitzvah ka'avid.
Right. Shenaseh isha lifrot l'rabot, v'makai karele reshut. Right. She's marrying a woman for peruvu. But what are you talking about? That it's optional.
Right. So for Rashi specifically, this question, the question that the Gemara is asking on the Mishnah is, why is it being categorized under Reshut? It's a mitzvah, and therefore the answer is no. It's a mitzvah purvu. That's not Reshut, and the answer is, well, we have a case where it is Reshut, specifically when he already has a wife, or he already has children, or yeah. Maybe you need both of them. And the other way of reading this, I think, is Loma kachin is v'ha mitzvah ka'avid is why is it forbidden on Shabbat? And then the answer is lo tzricha de'it leisha ubanim. You can read that as Rabbeinu Hananel reads it. V'lo mekadshin b'de'it leisha ubanim delav mitzvah ka'avid. It's specifically this rule that's being stated in the Mishnah is that you're not allowed to do kiddushin. Davka when, who's not allowed to do kiddushin? Someone who already has a wife and children, because they don't have the same mitzvah of kuvu that would require them to get married. But anyone else can.
And what would be the other explanation?
That's the other explanation.
No, there's an explanation for the other side.
So right. So the other explanation, the Rashi explanation would be, it's saying that what Rashi is saying is that the question that the Gemara is asking is not why are we forbidding someone from doing kiddushin? There's a mitzvah there; they shouldn't be forbidden from doing kiddushin in Shabbat. Rather, it's just asking why is it being placed in this list of reshut, and then it's just a question of the choice of the categorization of the Mishnah.
The third possibility is lo plug.
Yeah, and that's
could very well be that he has no wife and children. Therefore, we don't want to make this kind of distinction.
But the Mishnah does say
right.
Right. So that would be an argument for saying we don't want to make the distinction would be argument for forbidding it for everyone.
Right.
And we're just putting it in the category of reshut because sometimes it's reshut.
Which of the
And that's
three?
one read of the Rashi.
Which of the three do you prefer?
Do I prefer in terms of how I think the Mishnah is intending itself to be read?
No, you can choose what your preferences are. What makes sense?
Oh, which read of the Gemara? Which read of the Gemara do you like best?
Which read of the
Of Lo Mikad, do you like Rabbeinu Hananel or Rashi?
I think
I can support Rabbeinu Hananel because it would have said, if it's like Rashi, the way you explained Rashi at least, it should have said ha mitzvah hi.
Right.
It doesn't say ha mitzvah hi. It says ha mitzvah ka'avi.
Yeah.
So it sounds like it's talking about a terutz to why you should be allowed to do it.
All right. Yeah, that is one of the points that the Rama is going to bring in support of that side. Are people following? Any other questions or thoughts?
Let's take a 5-minute break now.
Yeah, let's take the break now. Great.
So I'll come back in 5 minutes. We are back.
All right, I want to get to the shoot, so I'm gonna skip over the Tosfot. Like goes sort of back and forth on these two opinions, and also like here you see Rabbi Notam saying explicitly what we said was the other way of reading it, and also brings the Yerushalmi that it seems to be more the basis of the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch's wording, which you'll remember we saw when we were talking about what is a chuppah. Amar Rabbi Mana, Hada Amra Ilin Dekansin Armalan Tzarich Lekonsa Mibo'od Yom Shelo Yehek Konek Kinyan B'Shabbat. This was a statement about specifically the widow marrying the widow has to make sure to do the ichud before Shabbat, because that's the moment of the kinyan. And as a possible tension with the Rabbeinu Hananel, Rabbeinu Tam reading of our Gemara. Are we good? Questions? All right. One more thing I wanted to bring to your attention before we go into which I think is like also in a different way relevant background to this shoot is this quote from an academic work on the role of orphans in children's literature. Sarah, do you want to read it?
Sure. Orphan characters in folktales and literature symbolize our isolation from one another and from society. They do not belong to even the most basic of groups, the family unit, and in some cultures, this is enough to cut them off from society at large. In other cultures, orphans are regarded as special people who must be protected and cared for at all costs. In either case, orphans are clearly marked as being different from the rest of society. They are the eternal other. Orphans are a tangible reflection of the fear of abandonment that all humans experience. Orphans are outcasts, separated because they have no connection to the familial structure, which helps define the individual. The outcast state is not caused by any actions of their own, but because of their difference from the normal pattern established by society. Orphans are a reminder that the possibility of utter undesired solitude exists for any human being. Orphans are at once. Yeah,
yeah, thank you. Perfect. All right. Who would like to volunteer to read the setup of the shoot? Or should I just pick someone? Raphael, do you want to read it?
Yes. Just a second. I'm trying to. It's a bit too small on my, but I'm trying. No, because my screen. וישמע אחריי קול, וישמע אחריי, עזרי מעם השם עשה שמיים וארץ. הוא יצילני משקיעה. ושמע אחרי כל רעש גדול, אשר העבירו קול במחנה, לומר, הביטו אחרי משה במעשה הנעשה, לידי מקרוב שסידרתי קידושין תחת החופה, כדרך הארץ שהכל יודעים סדר הקלה, למה נכנסה לחופה, והיה בישולה לבליל שבת. Oh, so he's being, the opening is a very poetic opening, but like he's saying that like people began asking about what I did, and like he's calling himself basically Moshe Rabbeinu, and saying people are beginning to like those crowds, Kol Rash Gadol, are speaking about me behind my back. Kol B'Machaneh, it's beautiful. But like the issue is that he did a chuppah in the middle of Leil Shabbos. כשעה ומחצה בלילה ומעשה והסיבה אשר הכריחוני לזה, ומבואר בנגלה לכל באי שער עירנו, וזה היה מעשה אשר נעשה. Meaning, there's no reason, if you actually know what happened and you're not just a gossip, I'll tell you what happened. איש היה בארץ ותם הכסף ממנו, ושידך ביתו הגדולה לבן זוגה, כן, הראוי לה, ויהי בימי שידוכיה אשר ארך הזמן עד כניסתם לחופה, הלך האב לעולמו והניח חיים לכל ישראל. ונשארה הבת שכולה וגלמודה ואין לה אב, אין לה אביהם כי הם קרובים, נעשו לה רחוקים והעלימו עיניהם ממנה זולתי גואל אחד, אחי אמה, אשר הכניסה לביתו, כי אין לה גואל קרוב ממנו. It's beautiful biblical language. He's basically saying she remained an orphan, and she only had this uncle that actually took care of her, and this is like we're building up to her wedding because she was meshudach to someone before her father died.
Right. There was a man who, like, yeah, great, fine.
Yeah, and he didn't have money at all, the father also. He did, like, before dying, he also lost everything. An amazing situation to get your daughter married.
It's an unfortunate, yeah.
Yeah. והיה כאשר באה בימים, when she became old, בזמן נישואיה, אשר ראוי לטבוח טבח, ואכן צורכי הסחופה, לא ראתה שום תמונת הנדוניה, ושאר הצרכים זולתי כל אחד בעלה שתטבול ותכין עצמה לחתונה. כי יהיה לה הנדוניה והבתולה הנ"ל עשתה, כאשר ציוו עליה האנשים והשכינות, ושמעה לקולם, וגם כיסו אותה ביום שישי בעינומה, כדרך הבתולות, כאשר נטוץ לה לערב, וכמעט קדש היום, שהיום הקרובים ליתן הנדוניה, קמצו ידיהם וחסרו ממתנת ידם הראוי לתת להם, והיה נחסר מן הנדוניה, כמעט שליש הנדוניה. So meaning, she actually didn't get the nedunya at all, that she's supposed to get the dowry a lot before the wedding. Like, it's like part of like the procession of the days before the wedding, but she didn't get. She was a very, I don't know, tam girl. She was ingenuous. I don't.
It came time for the wedding. She didn't see any dowry. And accepted or any like instruction, except like one person told her she should go and go to the mikveh and get herself ready for the wedding. And Rav Nachum, this is a support for your statement that the hinuma is a veil and not right. Yeah. Kisuota, like she covered herself with the veil rather than the canopy that were anyway. Side point. Yes.
But then they decided not to give her only 2/3 of the dowry, and this was a problem. This was like really moments before Shabbat.
Right. Her relatives were withholding. We're only giving like a fraction of the dowry she was supposed to get. And it gets worse.
וגם החתן נסוג החוב ולא רצה בשום אופן לקונצה. He didn't want to marry her at all. ולא שת ליבו לכל הדברים אשר דיברו אליו מנהיגי העיר, שלא לבייש את בת ישראל מכוח כסף נמאס. He wanted like to simply leave her there, and all the rulers of the city said you're going to ruin her life and so on, and don't do it for money. כפתן חרש איתם אוזנו, כפתן חרש, like a wow, like
a snake, like a deaf
yeah,
snake.
but peten cheresh is like a snake that doesn't hear. It's like he's the
definitely.
snake and he doesn't hear. Wow.
No, I think. Oh yeah.
פתן חרש איתם אוזנו ולא שמע לכל המלחשים ולא לכל גערת חכם. Even the rabbis came probably. תני לכל גערת חכם תנידן. Wow, it's a very biblical language. על ידי זה נמשך הזמן מכוח קטטות ומריבות. There were big fightings כדרך שאמרו לית כתובה דלית בתיגה, והצליח מעשה שטן עד שהגיע הזמן הנ"ל וישבו עצמן ונתרצה החתן להיכנס לחופה שלא לבייש את בת ישראל העגונה. קמתי וסידרתי קידושין בזמן הנ"ל. The Rama says, what do you want from me? In the end, when
So they didn't want to give the dowry. He didn't want to marry her as a result, and so there were arguments and fights back and forth. And he says, like, as it says, there's no ketubah without a fight, as people say, and veitzliach maaseh satan, and the Satan succeeded in his will until it came to the time that we spoke of, which was the nighttime on Friday night.
And like the Rama says, I simply stood up and did the kiddushin. That was what was expected for me as a rabbi. That's what I needed to do. I was only in duty. והנה ואשר מלינים עליי באתי להסיר תלונתן מאיתי ולהביא ראיה וטעמי ונימוקי עימי על מה שמחתי לומר בזה כזה וראה וקדש.
And so here I'm writing this tshuva to explain what my halachic reasoning was. But first, before he says, I did the wedding shelo levayesh bat Yisrael aguna, so as not to embarrass a proper daughter of Israel. Questions? Thoughts?
Yeah, I have a thought.
Yeah,
I have a thought, which is partially a comment on everyone smiling, which I find interesting in reading this tshuva. Now you're smiling more. This is why I started Yashrut, and only for this, frankly, so that when two people will be standing in front of you, desperate, you will be able to use old school learning, not any of that fancy stuff that you can get elsewhere, that is distancing stuff. You can use the old stuff and that you're absolutely from, and you do something which the hour needs. So someone should be, that's called Yashrut. That's it. And the only way to do it is to get people who probably want to go in that direction. And I prefer that they would learn with us, with me, with Nachum, rest of the faculty. So you don't get the proper Yashrut that everyone here has inside of them. You won't get it squished out by going to some goddamn seminary where they will either tell you to do it as an apikoros, not as a good yid, or they will tell you not to do it because it was an Adam Gadol and you're an Adam Katan. Did you hear a speech from me this year? No. This is the speech. And but the Tanai in all this is you have to be from in order to break what people think is frumkeit. You have to be able to break it, but you have to be, you have to be a Talmid Chacham, and you have to be smart, and you have to give the couple of other pages, which you're going to go to right now. But this is Yashrin. All right, it's enough for now. Any of you want to find me a good donor so I can keep going, that would be fine. But if not, at least learn and get ready. This will all happen to you. This will happen. This will come. You will be in the Ramah's position. I guarantee it. Yeah. All right. I don't need any comments on that. Don't tell me how you feel hearing this from me. Just know what I'm telling you is Torah Semis. Okay, Yavni, continue.
Thank you. I'm wondering if I should continue just looking at the time or if we should move on to the last seif.
Well, why don't you just tell us outside what is his main points of what are 2 or 3 main points of his justification.
Okay, so I'll try to summarize, and sorry I didn't plan the time better, but
don't summarize everything, just tell us a point or two.
The main points, right? So a couple of points. Going back to the discussion we saw in the Gemara, he basically says he presents the Rabbeinu Tam opinion as a strong opinion and defends it, including the point that Rav Nachman made, and he said, and he moreover says that he's not convinced that Rashi is against it either, because even if you say that it's about the terminology of the categories, then why doesn't that also mean that that it's only for that category? But he puts that aside because he says, like, all the other poskim have said that that's Rashi's opinion, so he must assume that it's Rashi's opinion. But still, b'shat like this, there isn't a reason to not hold by Rabbeinu Tam.
Wait, let me summarize your summary.
Yeah, sorry.
You're saying that there are these 2 opinions, Rashi and Rabbeinu Hananel, and according to Rabbeinu Hananel, for sure, you're allowed to do this. You're allowed to do Kiddushin on Shabbat because it's a mitzvah. Right. At least when, as in this case, the Chatan has no children.
Right.
And then he tries to say, even according to Rashi, maybe there's room to say that you could do this also. I guess that's what you're saying, because there's different interpretations of the Rashi.
Yeah.
It depends on what the Rashi might mean. And therefore, and I would even add, and I would add that seems to be the most straightforward shot in the Gemara.
Right.
That when it's a case of mitzvah, we have this in general. Like for example, I'll give you just another example. You're not allowed to tell a Gentile to turn on the lights on Shabbat. That's a shvut. It's a rabbinic law. But if you come to the synagogue and all the lights are out, and you're not going to be able to have a minyan there, you're not going to be able to read the Torah because the lights are out, so then you can tell them. So when there's a mitzvah, when you're trying to accomplish a mitzvah, the shvut is no longer, I wouldn't say you're violating a shvut, I would say the shvut was not engaged in such a circumstance.
Right. And furthermore, he brings the issue of the Yerushalmi, and he defends it mostly by saying that we always paskin like the Bavli when there's a machloket with the Yerushalmi, including in an issue of what is the reason behind, right? In this case, they agree a bit that it's a sul, but the question is, what's the reason?
What's the Yerushalmi say?
The Yerushalmi saying that it's about kinyan, and then he brings the issue. Oh,
I don't understand.
No, in the Bavli it was about Shema Yichtov.
No, we understood that to mean
right.
Shema. That's why kinyan is asur, because Shema Yichtov.
All right. I mean, yeah, we could.
All right. Well, I don't want to get into it. Fine.
Yeah. I mean, right. And so the other issue with the solution that the Tosfot he brings also for excusing the Yerushalmi is to say, the difference is that in Yerushalmi there isn't the same escape clause of like, it's only about if you're not. It doesn't say Rashut Davka, and it doesn't say that he doesn't have children, and the Tosfot say like maybe that is also only for the case where there's not the mitzvah of Purvu. That was another part of the argument, and he brings other sources. He brings the Samag to support it, and he All right, let's summarize and say let's that's it. And throughout he reminds us that this is an important thing because if he didn't do it then they might not have, then the marriage might not have gone through, and because it would have been an embarrassment to her because she got ready, and everyone gets married on Fridays, and what she's going to get married on the Sunday, and besides the Sunday is when the Christians get married, and yeah.
So right.
And then here's the most surprising thing that I don't know what to make of, and I if anyone has input. At the end, he says, and why should I go on and on? Go like Pukhaze, go out and see what the people are doing. B'chol makom ubeprat be'irenu asher yesh ba kibbutz I figured this out. ולפעמים עושים 5 או 6 חופות ביום אחד ונמשכים עד הלילה, ואם פוצה פה ומפצפץ ומה לי בתחילת הלילה או שעה או 2 בלילה דאין לחלק בין קיבלו שבת בעניין ברחו או לא. So
yeah, what he's saying
is people do it all the time.
Well, they don't do exactly what he did, because then they would have been talking. He must have done it when it was like 2 hours after Shabbat.
He was doing it late into Shabbat, and they do it when it's
and they do it when it's like a half an hour after Shkia, or half an hour after Seitz Chochavim.
Right.
Or I agree with that. Or they say, in case you bring a precedent, oh no, he did it much earlier. No, it was only a half hour. In other words, they to defend the established practice and to even quote unquote defend people like the Ramah, they'll say, no, it was not a meaningful act.
In other words, they do it on a time which is like hard to know exactly what it is. But the Ramah is saying, but be realistic. It's really after Shabbat. It started.
Right.
And so it's after Shabbat started, so they're no different from me. Anyway, thank you very much, Yavne. It's very interesting. Very nice that you brought the Orach Chaim and this whole this very interesting thing to get married on Shabbat.
And the place I found this reference, I didn't find it in the Mustikilim to the Shulchan Aruch. I found it in Responsa from the Reform movement from the 60s and 70s.
Okay, let's continue to the last Sif. Is that Andre?
You hear me now?
Very well, loud and clear.
Okay, so mine is a little bit shorter. And can I pick on someone to read the Mishnah, please?
אין נושאים נשים במועד, לא בתולות ולא אלמנות ולא מייבמין, מפני ששמחה היא לא, אבל מחזיר הוא את גרושתו.
Thank you.
No marriages.
Translate.
No getting married during Chol HaMoed or on the Moed, on Yom Tov. Whether they're betulot, almanot, not even a yibum, because all of this comes under the category of simcha. Aval machzir od gushato, but recoupling with the divorcee is okay.
Okay, so what would you say is mipnei shesimcha lo?
That's so we said the wedding causes happiness. We obligate the couple to be happy.
And Aval Marziru et Gerushato is not so, there is not so much happiness in it, isn't it? It's like a less kind of happiness.
What's wrong with happiness on a mud?
Okay, that's we're gonna see in Moed Katan. Aaron, I saw you wanted to read. Could you read here, please?
אמר רבי אלעזר אמר רבי חנינא לפי שאין מערבין שמחה בשמחה. רב בר רב אמר מפני שמניח שמחת הרגל ועוסק בשמחת אשתו. There's two different opinions as to why you can't do this. One is you don't combine two simchas, and the second is there's a fear that you will come to do the simcha that is not simchat haregel. You will sort of attend to that without doing the other one, which suggests that according to Rabbi Bar Rav Huna, there's no problem with being ma'ariv simcha b'simcha if you could do it well. You just probably can't do it well.
Can you read the Rashi also, please?
ואין מערבין שמחה בשמחה, כלומר בעניין דליסמך בשמחת מועד לחודeh. So that you will solely be engaged in simchat moed.
Okay, perfect.
Oh,
okay, so it's pretty clear. Now we don't need a translation here. It was so we don't ma'arivim simcha b'simcha. Lexi, may I bother you? Reading the next one, please.
Sure. Amar Rav Danya bar Katina Amar Rav minayin she'ein nosin nashim b'moed shne'amar v'samachta b'chagecha b'chagecha v'lo b'yishtecha. All right, so we say from where do we know that we don't marry women on the Chag? Well, because it says you should rejoice in your festivals and not in your wife. Ula Amar mifnei hatarach. Ula says it's because of the labor, which Rashi says that like you have to put in a lot of work to like set up the Suda and all the other things that you're doing for the marriage, and you're not supposed to be laboring even during Chol Hamoed.
We can't interrupt. Maybe this is clear to everybody, but I think that even the Mishnah that we were talking about, when it says it's talking about Chol Hamoed, we weren't actually talking about Yom Tov. The whole time we were talking about Chol Hamoed, not Yom Tov, because Yom Tov has the other problem that we discussed earlier, that writing.
Right, but here we're working within the framework, even though we frankly don't really abide by this framework so much anymore. I was saying that during Chol Hamoed, you're supposed to like mostly not be doing work other than in very select cases. And so Ula is saying that the problem here is that you're going to be putting in a lot of work to set up the wedding. And Rabbi Yitzchak Nabcha says it's because of Bitul Priya Revia, which Rashi explains, D'ishai nisuin b'yom tov, ein adam nose isha kol hashana kula, ela mamtin ad hamoed she'oseh suda achat l'moed u'nisuin. So Rashi says, what does it mean there's like going to be Bitul Priya Revia? Well, it's because if we allow this, then people will simply only get married on Chagim so that they can use one meal, 2 stones, whatever. You just make a big fancy thing, and then that could be both your Chag meal and your wedding meal. And since we don't want people to be putting off getting married and not having babies for months because of the Chag, we don't permit it.
And concerning
and look how we're all saved. Can you imagine? He had 3-4 days of Chol Hamoed, especially if there's a Shabbos in between, and then we have to be going to all these weddings. It would be awful. Besides all the people coming to it'd be terrible.
Also, Yavni, to respond to your comment, I feel like it's because like Simcha is dafka is like a mitzvah on Chag in like a particular way that it's not technically on Shabbos.
And also concerning what Nachum said, here it says B'Yom Tov, and not Rashi. Rashi understands the Moed as a Yom Tov, and not only as Chol Hamoed, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. It could be that Yom Tov also means Chol Hamoed there, but it's an interesting question, because I'm left with that dilemma. But we know you don't get married on Yom Tov. You can't get married on Yom Tov because for the same reason you can't get married on Shabbat. It seems the whole structure here is about Chol HaMoed. Perhaps even Rashi means when he says Yom Tov, Chol HaMoed, means a good day.
It seems like he must mean Yom Tov, right? Because he's talking about the Su'udi you're doing, which is going to be on Yom Tov, not
right.
Chol HaMoed.
Yeah, I was thinking that also. There is an opinion that you should have a Rabbi Eliezer's, that you should have a Suda on Yom Tov also,
Yeah,
on Chol HaMoed. But
you're stretching that.
You're right. So then I'm left with my question. I mean, why did we talk about Simcha and all of this stuff if we're really concerned with it's Yom Tov? Obviously, you can't get married. It's Kinyan, and Kinyan is going to lead to writing.
Well, maybe this is dealing on a different plane. It's dealing on the Simcha plane. You got the halachic prohibition. Here they talk about what are you mitasek with on Yom Tov? I mean on Moed. Chatzi lachem b'chatzi l'Hashem. Can't go. There'd be another if they had weddings on Chol Moed. You never take your kids on a picnic. I mean, it'd be awful. You have to find all those babysitters for all those weddings on Chol Moed.
Anyway, but the other Rashi above also seems to say Moed, Simchat Moed, which I don't know if that means Yom Tov. Rashi himself is saying different things. But I'm not convinced that the Yom Tov here means Dafka Yom Tov. And even
Pashtus Moed means Chol HaMoed Dafka.
Exactly. So why did Rashi switch over here to start talking about Yom Tov?
I'm not sure if that the girsa we have. I would the Talmudist of me would actually check if this girsa is.
It's problematic. It's a little bit problematic what that girsa there, but it doesn't bother me so much. I mean, it doesn't bother me in the sense that I'm
to defend you, which you can say Lagabe the rest of the year it's a Yom Tov. Even the
It's it's possible that part of what's motivating Rashi is the idea of especially with Ula and with both of those explanations, actually specifically with the Bitul Priya, the way he's explaining it, with the big Suda, your big fancy Sudas are mostly happening on Chag, not as much during Chol HaMoed.
I mean, it's a little bit weird, the whole explanation that Rashi is giving, because I could still get married Erev Chag and have the Suda on Chag.
Well, that's what we're about to get into. But
exactly.
He's explaining the Hava, at this point of the Gemara, right? And then we end up explaining that, if you only allow Erev Chag, people aren't going to put things off.
It's not exactly a Hava mina. He's explaining Mishum Bittul Piri Rivya.
Right, but isn't he saying that that's why we'd be worried about this? And then he explains why we're not worried about that when specifically you only allow it Erev HaRegel, because people aren't going to be planning around that.
Mm-hmm. And now that she mentioned Erev HaRegel, should we continue with the Talmud?
Sure. So Mutarin Nisa Erev HaRegel, so it's permitted to get married the day before the Chag begins. Kashya Lakulhu. This is difficult for all the different opinions that said that you can't do marriages during the Regal. Lo Kashya Laman Amar Mishim Simcha. Ikar Simcha Chad Yomahu. No, actually, it's not difficult for the one who said that the issue is Ma'arvin Simcha B'Simcha, because the main Simcha, even though yes, you're doing Simcha for 3 or 7 days or whatever, the main Simcha is on the first day. So if you do that Erev HaRegel, you've gotten that out of the way before the Regel starts. Right. So Rashi just says Misuin Chad Yama B'Shar Yoma Lo Chashiv Me'erev Simcha B'Simcha. Fine. Laman Amar Mishum Tircha Ikar Tircha Chad Yomahu. Again, for Ula's explanation of the problem is all the preparation. Again, you will be doing preparations for Sheva Brachot, whatever, for the next couple of days. But the biggest tircha is for the main Sudat Nisuin. And so if you're doing that before Chag, then you're not actually working on Chag / Chol HaMoed. Rashi says, right, Yikar Tircha, Nisuin, Biyom Rishon, Nisuin. Fine. And then Lamanda Amar Mishum Bitul Prayer, yeah, Lachad Yoma, Lo Mashi Inish Noshe. Okay. So the person who says we're worried about Bitul of being fruitful and multiplying, we say for one day a person wouldn't like wait or push things off. And so Rashi explains this. Klomar, kivan she'eno yochol lahatchil ela be'erev haragel, en mamtinin ad haragel, d'dioma mitrame milta, d'lo matzi matchil be'erev haragel, v'lo matchil kol haragel. If we specifically only allow you to get married erev haragel, but not to do it during the regel, like it seems like they're in a reality where like things happen that make wedding dates change, and that's not like such an uncommon thing. And so given that this only works out in the like, ooh, I get to have my Suda serve both functions if you get it on this exact day, and it might end up having to be pushed off. Like you might not be able to do it on that day. Who knows? People aren't going to be like planning months in advance to do an Erev HaRegel just so that they can get that overlap. Because if you allow doing the whole Chag, they'd have a lot of opportunities for overlap. If you only allow it during the Erev Chag, they're not going to bet on the wedding actually happening that day.
So again, clearly we're talking about that you're having the wedding on Chol HaMoed, where it's more than one day. In other words, this Rashi and this Gemara is again against that.
Because like if you allowed it on
if it's just Yom Tov that we're talking about, it's also one day.
No, but as in like if you allowed it, first of all, there's at least 2 days in multiple of the ones when you have first and second Yom Tov. And also if we're in Galus, then you have multiple days for each of those.
Well, you have Yom Tov Acharon.
4 whole days.
Right, well, then you're asking, why does he talk about one day? What do you mean one day? So he'll do it Erev Shvi Shel Pesach. Or you'll do it Erev Shabbat on Chol HaMoed. You have 3 days. I think Rashi is giving a general principle. You know, he's saying, we were talking, not Rashi, the Gemara. He's saying, people are going to plan their weddings for the 7 days of Yom Tov. In other words, in also maybe also Chag, but also Chol HaMoed. But if it's just one day, then people are not going to wait for that one day.
Probably the pshat is that it's talking about the whole chunk, right? Like to me, this is the most straightforward reading is that it's referring like to the Chag and the Chol HaMoed.
Probably, yes, probably. And we're looking for one reason for all of it. And that's Simcha, and that's Tircha, and that's Bittul Piri Rivya. But if it would just be one day, then people wouldn't do Piri Rivya because they wouldn't wait for that one day and just, or, it's not really one day, of course, as you pointed out. It's 2 days, or as I pointed out, it's 2 days. It's Erev Yom Tov Rishon, Erev Yom Tov Acharon, and there's actually two. There's actually
right, but we don't allow Erev Yom Tov Acharon because that's on Chol HaMoed.
That's right.
Oh. But not because of. But why don't we allow it? Because of Simcha, not because of writing. Whatever.
Correct, but there's the Simcha. There's also the Tircha thing. Again, if you're not supposed to be doing that much labor in Chol HaMoed.
Right.
Okay. Great. So now that we saw, this is somewhat the whole Talmud, the whole Sugya. Yavne, would you like to read the tour?
Sure. אין נושאים נשים בחול המועד, לא בתולות ולא אלמנות ולא מייבמין, אבל מחזיר גרושתו מן הנישואין, אבל לא מן האירוסין, וטעמה משום דאין מערבין שמחה בשמחה, או משום ביטול פיריה וריביה, פירוש שלא ישהה לישא עד המועד, לפיכך מותר לישא בערב המועד.
Okay, perfect. So now we see that what the Arbaturim just did is that he took all the mentioned reasons above and he put it in his Psak Halacha. And would you like also to read the Shulchan Aruch?
Sure. אין נושאים נשים בחול המועד, לא בתולות ולא אלמנות ולא מייבמין, אבל מחזיר גרושתו מן הנישואין, אבל לא מן האירוסין. And he didn't give any reasons at all.
Okay, yeah, exactly, perfect. But now we know them, which is the important thing. Okay, Sarah, would you like to read the Beit Shmuel? I think we don't hear you again. Oh, we don't hear you. Alan, would you like to read it, please?
And nosim nashim b'chol hamod. Ayim b'chayim sham mevor de mutar lisa be'erev haregel. V'katav harashba mutar lasot suda b'regel. Dikar simcha u'anisuin. V'chayin im hayala nisuim kodem haregel. Filu lo asa suda mutar lasot suda b'regel. The came parish Pesach b'Shulchan Aruch Sham v'Shiltei Giburim Etzel Etzel it's a Katav b'Shem Aripa Asor Lasot Suda b'Yom Tov Elim Ken Nichnasu Me'atzman Nikansu.
Perfect. Right. Again, so now the Beit Shmuel is bringing to the Shulchan Aruch what we read before. And now I have like a question. Is it possible to marry be'erev Yom Kippur? Concerning what we just read.
But can I ask a question? How do you understand that last part? Yeah.
Asur la'asot seuda b'Yom Tov.
Yeah.
אלא אם כן.
אלא אם כן נכנסו מעצמן? What is that?
I don't know. Okay. Go ahead, Aaron.
I think it might be you can't like prepare a I'm not sure it's not clear to me that the Ritva is talking about a wedding specifically, that he might just be saying you can't, sorry, no, he must be talking about a wedding too. Yeah, I think whoever just said in the chat that they elope or that they seem to be alone outside of the context of a broader community. It seems to be that.
Wait. Oh, that you're allowed to do a wedding meal on Yom Tov if they did their wedding by themselves as opposed to with the community?
Like maybe if you're not like inviting other people, they're just the two of them, I guess, doing some
I think what it is,
maybe that would.
Here's my guess. Asur la'asot suda b'Yom Tov. You can't, in other words, we just got through explaining that you could do the Suda on Yom Tov if you got married Erev Yom Tov. Get married Erev Yom Tov and then do the Suda on Yom Tov and then saves a lot of money. You'll have the Suda on Yom Tov. And everybody anyway is going to have a Suda on Yom Tov. What does it say? Aleph, what is it?
Elim Ken.
Elim Ken, yeah, there's a cursor on top of it. Elim Ken nichnasu ma'atzmam. You can't do that Suda on Yom Tov unless, maybe this is what you were saying, Aaron, or unless they congregated on their own.
Meaning it's not a Suda that's being made for the wedding. It's a Suda that's being made anyway, and then you can.
Yeah, in other words, people
Sorry,
said,
Andrew,
where's
the
the Sheva Brachas? We're coming. We're all coming. All of a sudden, like in The Hobbit, all the dwarfs appear and they say, where is the food? I don't know, and then the host has to bring it out. Maybe that's what
you can't plan it, but it can happen spontaneously.
You can't plan it, but if it's a social media spontaneous event. Yeah, Elim came nichnasu ma'atzman. Is that what you were saying, Aaron?
That's what I was originally going to say, and then I changed my mind and said something else, but also because I misunderstood. So no.
Okay, whatever. I think that's what it's saying. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's.
Okay, so with the whole thing of the Suda, I just put a funny question. Is it possible to do it before Yom Kippur? Or is not?
It's usher. But it's not usher from the din of marriage. It's the usher from the din of Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, Erev Yom Kippur is supposed to be of a certain, not supposed to have simcha, not supposed to be happy. So there, that's where the Easter would be. Question is, would the wedding be chal? Would it, the marriage take place? Of course, yes, absolutely. But we don't do it because that's not what you're supposed to be doing here, Yom Kippur.
Right. And
You're supposed to be crying and beating your breast.
Well, you're supposed to be marbe besuda. You're supposed to have a big meal.
You're supposed to have the Suda and cry at the Suda. You don't get up and dance.
No, I'm just saying you should have.
Do akapas.
It's not a Suda Tamafseket, is what I'm saying.
And I noticed that somebody wrote already in the chat that it was possible to marry on Purim. Who was it? I think it was Josh. Josh, would you like to read this little teshuvah from the Rashba?
Who's this? This is the Rashba?
עוד שאלת אם מותר לישא אישה בפורים, כיוון דקיימא לן, אין נושאים אישה במועד, משום דאין מרבים שמחה בשמחה, והטעמה נמי שייך בפורים, והשמחה בשמחה היא, בשמחה ומשתה קבילו עליי. Right, so you asked if it's allowed to marry on Purim, because you might say it's the same as on a Yom Tov, and Yom Tov we said en malvim simcha b'simcha, and that would seem to apply also to Purim, because there's lots of simcha and mishteh on Purim.
This really a tshuva that could lead to a lot of problems in life, real problems.
מסתבר שהוא מותר, ושמחת בחגיך כתיב. כתיב בחגיך ולא באשתך. אבל בפורים מותר. So actually the whole simcha b'simcha thing is there's a verse that says ושמחת בחגיך. You should be happy on the holiday, and that's what it means. You don't make simcha b'simcha. Don't be happy with your wife. It's a zero-sum happiness. But Purim is not like that. Purim mutar, because you don't have a verse that says that. ועוד דהב אלי חד יומא, ומשום חד יומא לא מה שאיניש נפשי. Because the Purim's only one day.
Like he was saying about Puri Rivia, people won't wait and delay a marriage because of one day.
Right.
Although some people do for Lag BaOmer.
כמאן דאמר תמה משום ביטול פרי וריביה. Okay, so if the time of not getting married on the moed is bitul piri v'rivya, then that doesn't apply either on the moed on Purim because it's only one day. ובניינים אלו הולכים בהם להקל במדרבנן הם.
Great.
Purim's מדרבנן, and so don't worry.
Great, shkoyach. That was it. Thank you.
I want to comment on Machzir Grushato, that it was said because there's less simcha, maybe that's, but Machzir Grushato is like an emergency situation. It's a very difficult thing to take place. And we're also worried about Machzir Grushato that you should not have a relationship with someone else, in which case then it would be usher for him to marry her again. So it's just a comment saying Machzir Grushato is because it's considered it's a mitzvah b'fnei atzma. It's a special mitzvah, and we're generally for this kind of mitzvah we don't delay when we're able not to delay. So I think that's the pshat of Machzir Grushato. Shkayach.
Yishakayach, everybody. Very interesting. Don't get
I'm
married
ready to say
on.
Mazel Tov. We should have like a dance. But it's the Omer. So I guess not.
Is the Omer. So don't get married on your.
Nothing, because of the Zionists, there's almost nothing left of the Omer. first Rabbi Akiva, the big Zionist, made Lag BaOmer, and then that was one thing.
The truth is, Lag BaOmer is
Yom
this great.
Yom Ha'atzmaus, Yom Yerushalayim, just nothing left to the Omer.
Right. Well, I'm just saying, Lag BaOmer. It's amazing that Lag BaOmer changes the status of the Omer, and if that changes the status of the Omer, then certainly Yom Ha'atzmaut should. Anyway, don't get married on Chol HaMoed. But you can get married on Shabbos. That's the maskana of the shir.
Okay. So what Siman we're doing next time?
Next week is the next Siman.
5.
65. It's
And then we will be talking about singing and dancing.
Okay.
Excellent. It's going to be Lexi and Joel. And I'm looking forward to it. I think this was great. This Siman, how it went. And I'm sure the next one will be also great. All right. Laila Tov, everybody.
Laila Tov, Mazel Tov.
Yesher Koach.